As opposed to going where we don't go?
Thinking we're going where we're not going. So good morning. This is Anthony and Gabe and I
Hey,
on a
good morning.
Sunday morning in Los Angeles, Venice particularly, where I am and Gabe is. Anthony's down, and you're in San Diego today, Anthony?
Yes.
Roughly. So we're back, and we're going to talk about the mental obsession. And largely, the mental obsession is a discussion about spirituality and about reality, about actuality, rather than supposed and imposed ideas about reality. And yet it includes that too, because the ideas we have that we might think are true and real create great seeming complications. And I say seeming because they're simply imagined complications that we're coming up with in the thinking we're doing, and imagining that thinking happens to be real. And then as a result, imagining those effects are real rather than simply a manifestation of something we're creating by the thinking we're doing. And some of this may
sounds like a lot of work.
Well, I would say the work is trying to maintain the ideas we have that aren't true and think someday they will be, because that can never happen. So the more we try, the more futile it is, or the more futile it starts to seem. And if we're really convinced it is reality we're trying to attain with those thoughts, thinking they are reality, why would we be trying to attain it all the time if they were real? We would just stop and say, well, thoughts are reality. And given that point, thinking may be, since it's a byproduct of nature, it's something human bodies do. It isn't really the thinking we're struggling with. It's the thinking about. It's the how and what we're thinking that causes the conflicts. So if you think of thought as just something that the brain is thinking of things that we don't think it's thinking of, and yet it's processing and analyzing and doing trillions of interactions of things that are monitoring the chemical balance of our system, our bodies, all of our systems, our nervous system and psychosympathetic system and cardiovascular system. All of our bodily functions are being monitored by our brain.
And I'm only thinking about three things at any time.
Well, you might think that, but my sense is we've mistaken thinking for only that thing we do in the domestic language that we have when we're talking to ourself, our alleged self. So that internal conversation seems to be what human consciousness is. And I would say that human consciousness is way, way, way beyond that. That's just an immediate interaction with thoughts we're having. And then we've assigned those thoughts with who we are, because if we think thoughts are reality, then we think what thinking thinks about is who we are, that self we talk about. I would say, and this is something that's really gotten clear to me in this past week, and Gabe, we didn't get on to this point yesterday, but I think when we took our walk, but I think it's worth noting that if we've been talking to a self in our own experience, our relationship with everybody else is based on that self we've been talking to. So we're not really relating to everyone else, we're relating to the self we think we are in our relations to everyone else. And that's why selfishness and self-centeredness and all of the words used to talk about that preoccupation of thinking about oneself as excluding other people seems to create this seems to be something we shouldn't be doing, because it's so self-absorbed and it's so toxic and it's so dismissive of what other people are basically thinking, not who they are, but we're really just dismissing what they're thinking, because who they are in their essence doesn't change because of the thoughts they have. Their experience with those thoughts in their thinking changes. Their body actually is a witness to what we think. It actually responds and feels and has ideas about what we're thinking. And when I think who I am is what I think, and that's not in fact who I am. Self-centered fear is the automatic, so that becomes the heart and soul, literally. The heart and soul of that self is that fear. Why? Because I know better than to think that my thinking is the source and creator of reality, because if that were the case, nobody else would be thinking anything but me. And there would be no other reality out there but mine. And to think of that is a pretty good point to see how quickly people have been fighting over thoughts throughout history rather than anything else. They've cloaked it in patriotism and nationalism and religion and all of those other things, which are just narratives developed about self-centeredness, this idea that who we are is what we think. And the sages and the gurus and the Zen masters and the yoga teachers and the mullahs and the what were they? And the mystics, the seers, but in India they were the Maharajis. They talk about the fact that we are not our thoughts. It's been talked about for a long, long time. If there's an infinite source of knowing, that knowing wouldn't be a thinking knowing, it would be a knowing knowing. So it wouldn't be in doubt. It wouldn't have the same collision of experience that we find when our thoughts are doubtful and we feel doubtful about ourselves, by the way. It's not surprising. If who I am is what I think, then feeling doubtful would actually be having doubtful thoughts that are doubtful because they're not certain.
How do you get over some bad decisions? Like one of the things that's bothering me is, yeah, I made some bad financial decisions. And now there's nobody else really at first everybody gave me a hard time, but now nobody else is it's only me doing it. It's only myself telling me that it's not a good thing. And I'm having a little bit of trouble because it's true. And
you mean the decisions you made were accurate?
Yeah, I don't even know anymore. That's the confusing part. You know what I mean? When you just let everything go, you have nowhere to go. It's kind of one of the hard parts about letting everything go, it seems like. When you're just focused on your obsession, you know, write what you want, where to go, who's bothering you. But when you just kind of let it all go and give it up, you're kind of going, okay, there's nothing really bothering me, but I don't really have a drive.
Well, that's very interesting, Anthony, because I think if you look at that and I was sitting with someone the other day that I hadn't seen in many years, and we had a conversation. She has done all kinds of spiritual things in her life and has been, I mean,
walking down the right path. Walking down the right path.
Well, she's tried all sorts of things and, you know, enormous commitment. And I knew when I met her at 18, I met her 35 years ago, and she just had this sense about her that was profound. She said, you know, thinking back, she said, you remember that well, but I remember being a young girl that really didn't seem to know much. But it wasn't her thinking that I was zeroing in on. I had a hit of her she was just a substantial woman that was pretty profound. And I always had that connection with her that was pretty profound. So we hadn't talked in many years. And she came over, we sat for 3.5 hours and talked on the couch. And at one point she was listening because I was kind of,
I wish you would have recorded that.
Yeah, well, it's recorded, but you weren't there, so recorded sort of in memory.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you. So what was the gist?
Well, she was talking about getting to a point. She was talking about experiences she was having, and she said she'd gotten to a point in this conversation she'd just gone through a divorce. She got to a point in a conversation with somebody, and I don't remember if it was the husband or somebody. But she said, I just had no words. They left. She said, I was trying to actually explain, and all of a sudden it just went away. We were talking about intuition. And I said, you know, it may be worth noting that intuition, this wisdom, this absolute knowingness is not in words. It's in a state of presence of knowing. And that presence of knowing is peace. And you sort of just described it, Anthony, that you started to see what was obsessive. You started to let it go. And all of a sudden you have this sense of nothingness, as though there's nothing there anymore. Because you're thinking, but you were thinking that obsessive thinking was reality and all that there was. So think about this. Imagine this. You start to realize it isn't all that there was. And now you're starting to actually face honestly all that there is. And you're noticing that it is not complicated and it isn't an argument and it isn't constricted or conflicted or in anguish or emotional turmoil. It's perfect peace and it's silent. And there's a knowingness in that. So I said to her, consider that moment that you felt like you were struggling for words, you were really conceding the knowing, and there's no fight. Most of the time, in my experience, I'm struggling for words because I'm trying to help convince somebody of something. I'm trying to say it well enough for people to get the spirit of it. But my sense is I often say it so forcefully that I end up creating the resistance I'm trying to overcome. Or I say it with a sense of demand or a sense of insistence, that actually creates the resistance in the other person. And I'm not thinking they're doing that resistance. I know now I'm creating that resistance. There's a part of me who wants to take credit for this rather than concede the absolute knowing nature is something that we've all been given. And the credit due is to give it to whatever that source is. I don't have to define it to know it. And none of us have to define it to have it. So if it's something we already have and it's infinite, it's an absolute state. I can't give it to anybody.
Well, and why? And now I've never really asked this, or I guess maybe I have, but why is this infinite source, knowing source, so critical to your whole philosophy? What if there is no knowing source? Does anything change? What changes
Well,
if you?
if there wasn't, then that thing that you were doing that you thought was the only thing you could do, you would be doing as the only thing you could do obsessively. And you would feel great because it's the only thing you could do. You would be realizing your potential, all of it.
I like that.
Okay. So let's say that we think the limits of thought is all there is. My question was,
Yeah.
and the thing that sort of blew this open for me was, how could it be? What would it be limited by if it's limited? You know, how could I be so certain it's limited without mentioning what would it be limited by? Obviously, it's something without limits. So it's like, Anthony, we're standing on the shore looking at the horizon and thinking because it looks like the end of the
Yeah.
world, it is the end of the world, rather than just saying it seems like it. And within the context of my
Yeah.
thinking, I could rationalize that. And my sense is when people feared the horizon, they were really fearing the horizon of their own thinking. Because if that infinite state exists and that infinite knowing exists, we know that knowing. And when we're not thinking right, we feel disturbed because we know something's wrong. If we've been misreading the cues by
Yeah.
making believe all we are is this self we've created in thought, then we've been busy defending the limits of our thinking rather than starting to notice that if I just look reinforcement and reactivity is about defending and trying to maintain the limits. It's about saying don't, and you have all heard and hear, and I do my best to try to push people to their limits. I want to have them see the absolute anger and hostility and the reactiveness that comes out of that. Now, I don't know that that's the best way to do this, but I have found that when people do that, they feel embarrassed, they feel ashamed, they come back 2 and 3. One of the guys has never come back, who got to a point, actually, it was with you, Anthony, got very frustrated and thought you were the problem and left and has never come back. Because
Buddy.
nobody else is ever my problem. It's what I'm thinking of them that is my problem, because the one thing I get to do freely is make choices about what I think. And it isn't, again, the thinking I'm making. I'm not choosing to think or not think. My brain thinks. It's just what it does. It's like it judges. That's what brains do. It analyzes, compares, contrasts, and it is dealing with millions of bits of information every part. The smallest second you can imagine, it's dealing with things that would be unimaginable to even think about right now.
That seems overwhelming, right?
Well, it's overwhelming if I thought I had to do something about it. But here's what's interesting.
I see.
Here I am in the limited scope of making choices about what I think. And if I make those choices and they're wrong and I think they're right, now I've created an interminable, impossible seeming reality because my experience becomes intoxicated and consumed with this conflict as though it's reality because it's all I'm thinking about now.
What does interminable even mean?
Never ending.
No term. Interminable. No term.
Now let's look it up while we're on that point.
And the problem I'm having now, because I told somebody that I'm not going to get married because I don't ever want to fight. I don't fight with myself. Like if nobody's here, and she said, that's not true. You fight with yourself all the time, Anthony.
Oh, I'm with her.
Yeah. Because I was making
we
this
must
big
be
thing.
married, Anthony, because I'm with her.
Yeah. So that's
okay,
my
so
problem,
interminable
though.
and capable of being terminated. Unending.
Okay. Unending.
So if I've determined that my life is that interminable situation because it is so compelling and my attention is completely focused on it, it doesn't make it reality. It doesn't make it truth. It doesn't allow me to function. It actually creates a dysfunction and a disharmony. But there's an indication there. What I've learned, what I notice, is that it's actually nature telling me I've interpreted something incorrectly, that the free choice I have has given me a sense of condemnation. It seems odd that we would have absolute freedom to think whatever we want, whatever we can think, we can think. I don't know, to Gabe's point, maybe we can't think about certain things, which mean we're not completely free, but within the scope of what we can think, we're free to think, right? If I'm the one doing that, choosing that, and then suffering the consequences of that, and making believe those things I'm suffering are happening to me, I'm creating an environment that gives me the impression that I have nothing to do with it. And that's effectively addiction. I have nothing to do with it, so I can't do anything about it. So I will continue to do it because there's no other choice. And as a result, I think there's absolutely no possibility it can be resolved.
The bucket of buckets.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. So if that is how I've interpreted it, here's the other interpretation. I feel now, what am I doing in that process? What I'm doing in that process over time, I'm becoming desensitized and thinking that that's the master plan. What I need to be is numb. What I need to do is desensitize myself to what's happening. And I'm better off doing that. That's the general master plan for humanity. That's what self-help generally is about, in my experience. Try to feel better about what you're doing that's wrong. Why are we always constantly looking to feel better if there weren't something inherently wrong that we're not even paying attention to? Wouldn't be that way.
Well,
Nobody comes to me.
it goes back to Elon Musk. Sorry again. It goes back to Elon Musk saying that being the CEO is a terrible job because all you see is the problems. You don't have to worry about anything that's going right. You just need to fix problems. The worst problems is all you deal with.
All right, so let's use that. In our experience, the only thing we struggle with are the problems we created. So if I'm creating them and I'm struggling with them in mental terms, because now we're not trying to make a car, we're not trying to replace the energy grid with batteries, we're not trying to do those mechanical things, we're simply talking about the mechanics of thought, our own ability to actually notice what we're doing with the thinking we have, this thing that we choose to do. If we're choosing our thinking and we're choosing wrongly about what we think and how we think by thinking it's reality, then we've turned then we think there's no other reality. Like reality all of a sudden isn't reality in that form. That's a major problem with expressing or functioning in the world, living according to life's terms. Right?
And I think we could be onto something here, is that I don't think people that really have a bad psychological problem don't talk about reality, right? You don't sit there and explain reality to somebody that's just crazy.
But what they do explain, which you and I have both done, is that their reality. Thinking what they're thinking is reality. They're trying to explain their reality. And that's, to John's point, the co-conspiratorship that
Yeah,
we're looking for people to agree with it.
right.
But getting back to the point I was making,
Sorry.
if that disruption can be turned into an absolute nightmare and an impossibility and a complete dysfunctional insanity, which means I'm not facing life at all, I'm not dealing on life's terms, I'm dealing on the terms I think exists. So I'm not functioning at all. If I can notice that the desensitization and the numbness that I've developed over time has literally been a psychic anesthesia. Denial is a psychic anesthesia to actually to thinking I'm aware. It's trying to put me to sleep. Program says we had a spiritual awakening. What are we awakening to? Something absolutely intact. Bill uses the word over and over in different ways, and it's the same word: omnipotent, all-powerful, unlimited, absolute, infinite. All of those describe the exact same thing. Different words, the exact same thing. So our words are never going to define this. But the essence of it, if we already know it, and we're reminded by others who also know it and have it, that it is absolutely available and in reach, that might allow us to start utilizing the disturbance that's created in our thinking as a guidance system to say something I'm thinking is wrong right now.
What if we use this? Whenever somebody comes to you and says, Jack, I'm really upset about this, or this is terrible, or I need to see a picture of it. We can't even talk about anything that you can't show me a picture of. And they, well, I can't show you a picture of this. This is right. All this stuff is unphotographable.
Well, but Anthony, the narratives we create in the stories are that picture because all of those narratives, people will say stuff like, I feel like I'm stuck in my head. Think
Show
of
me a
that
picture of
picture.
it. I need, like, from now on, that's what I'm
Anthony,
going to tell
stop.
myself.
I get it. I get it. Just slow down here. If somebody says, I'm stuck in my head, think of
Yeah.
that picture.
But I'm tired of thinking, I want to see a photo because I'm realizing none of my
Anthony,
problems are real.
Anthony,
They're just,
our problems and our thoughts are images in our head. They're images, which is why we develop narratives around them. And the narratives are stories. Now, we've
yeah.
probably only gone over this two or
But
three hundred times.
it's fascinating a day. I go over this 100 times a minute. But it's fascinating that everybody does have an image. It's not that they're thinking of memory. It's really a picture, like you're describing. Tell me about the picture, and they would start telling you, well, it's this. The lighting is like this. You know, there's a light over here.
Anthony, let's just talk about Anthony since Anthony's here and we can be
But
pretty
I
sure
am
what
talking
you.
about me. I'm saying that's what I realized. Like I'm gonna next
Okay.
time I'm telling myself how terrible something is, I'm gonna say, well, let's see a picture of how bad this is. And I'm like, well, there is no picture because it's
Let me
all in my
suggest
head.
something to you. Thoughts are imagined. They're all images.
No, they're
We're creating.
real. That's the difference. We're onto it. See, I think thoughts are real, but I really realize what you're saying that they're not real. But that's
No, no,
the
no.
parent. That's
Listen, thoughts have the potential to express reality, like a dam has the potential to release water and channel it. Thoughts are designed to express reality. When we're creating what we call our own reality, we're living in a delusion about
right.
reality,
And you have
thinking
to
there's
fight
no
it
other.
all the time. It's a hell of a battle to always be
You
fighting
don't
every.
have to fight it. You have created a fight that you can't win. And as long as you maintain that
That's
fight,
the
you're going to think you have to fight it.
right. Yeah, that's
So,
it. We could just go home right now, as far as I'm concerned. Oh wait, I am home.
so in the process, as you're mad, if we have a nature, Anthony, that is
Yeah.
the same.
And that's funny that you just used the word nature, right? You just said we have if we have a nature,
Yes.
right? And that's what it's basically all based on is nature.
Yes. So I only say if because as insistent as I can be to be heard and to clarify the points I'm trying to make, which I'm
Yeah,
often not able to make in the midst of the conversation. And sometimes I forget. I mean, I lose my train of thought. And so the locomotive gets,
I
continues
like the
down the
train of
tracks and
thought.
the
That
caboose is stuck in the middle of the desert.
I like that imagery too, the train of thought. I love
But
it.
when you start listening to the words we use, they're all descriptive
Yeah,
narratives about
amazing.
pictures. I'm stuck in my head. My thoughts are attacking me. Think of that. This is an armored
Yeah,
cavalcade of thoughts coming to me to attack me.
yeah,
Whatever we're doing, we're using words as a narrative to develop pictures, which is exactly what screenwriting and literature and poems and all of that is about. Why? Because that's what thoughts are. They're images. And what are images but illusions? They're literally pictures of things. They're not the things the pictures are of, just like we think of things. We're not thinking of the thing, we're thinking of the thought of that thing.
would you
And
rather
just,
go on all day long thinking about how great everything is that you've done and how all these special accomplishments? Was that the way you're going to want to live your life? Just sitting in your head all day saying, God, you're so wonderful, Anthony. You've done this and look at this, your friends. Or do you feel better going, okay, now what can I fix around this place here? What needs some improving?
well, on the point we were on several points ago, if if the problems are problems and they're seen as problems, in our thinking. When we feel the disturbance, the
Yeah.
subtlety, what I learned was when I started realizing this, I was really numb to a lot. So, book says historically, there's been a statement that was in the book pain is the touchstone of spiritual growth. Well, why would that be?
Yeah.
Why would I need pain? Well, because denial is saying this disturbance isn't enough for me to notice. This disturbance
Wow.
isn't enough for me to notice. This
Yeah.
disturbance. And 2 years into it, now I'm almost overrun by it. And I
20
can't I
years,
can't
20
deal with
years
it
into
anymore.
it.
Whatever it is. So my denial hasn't stopped what's happening. It's given
Yeah.
me a false impression that it's stopped. And what's happening is the tension is continuing to build. What do people do? Explode, have nervous breakdowns. They have volatile emotional explosions. It isn't uncommon, it isn't unusual. It is something you can predict will happen if you do that thing that way.
Yeah.
So what I had previously learned, especially in early sobriety, when I really noticed that I had a mental problem, I knew it within 90 days because I knew from the whole far back as I could remember, I struggled mentally. I felt like I was stuck in my head.
What's
I
the
felt like,
difference between being 20 years sober and I've never been sober that long. So is there a difference when you go between 30? Somebody had explained it to me that you get one extra second of clutch. Like you could put for every year sober, you could put the clutch in for 1 second. So if you're 30 years sober, you get 30 seconds of thinking about what you're going to do before you do it.
when we're talking about absolute knowing, that never changes, no matter how much time you have and how willing you are to allow it to be as it is may change. I don't know that it's time. I know guys who are sober a long time and aren't happy. They act happy. They try to do everything they can happy, but they get irritated very easily. I happen to be one of those guys. It doesn't mean what I realized is it beginning to notice this doesn't mean nothing bothers you anymore, because the goal of addiction was trying to be numb to it all.
Yeah.
So the ideas I had about growth and enlightenment were, when I'm not bothered by anything, I'll be better. But the fact is, in my experience, there is plenty to be bothered with. And if I don't bother to be bothered, I'm not going to do anything that might actually be meaningful and helpful to somebody who may not even recognize they need help, and would leave me to make believe I'm alone in the world and have no connection to anybody else, and would be discompassionate and think nothing of anything else going on. And I would say, my experience is, when I got clearer about all this, I started being very upset about things that were going on. And I began to realize that I'd been upset since I was a kid, because I could sense it, but I didn't know what to make of it. That was the only difference. I was young. I was 3, 4. I can remember looking out the windows at the house and saying, what the fuck is going on? I didn't say it in those words, but I had that same visceral experience. What is happening? I don't get it. I don't understand what's going on. The only thing that made sense to me, ironically, was 2 kids across the street. We were in Detroit in the mid 50s, right? So I'm 2 years old. It's 1957, 3 years old. And these guys rebuilt a car, and it didn't have a hood on it. It didn't have a trunk on it. It had these bare wheels, and it looked like a little race car, but it was one of those round Plymouths or something. And the guy came barreling down the street with his brother hanging onto the front of the car, literally on the car at 30 or 40 miles an hour. And I thought, oh, that makes sense. That looked exciting to me. That looked like something that was daring, and there was some fun in that. It wasn't the sort of everybody leaving their driveway at 7:30 every morning to get to work by 8 and back by 4:30. And there was a systematic repetition that was really troubling. But my sense is we all have great awareness. We haven't taken that awareness and utilized that awareness because we've been trying to quell that awareness in the name of trying to manage this other thing we're doing about this thing called a self that's all imagined. And all it is thinking about thinking itself that we're trying to manage. So
and I guess to get better, I've got to ask for help. So here's where my stretch is. I need help with this. I'm just realizing this. It's like we talk about it all the time, but it's sinking in. Is that I'm always upset about a decision I've made. It's nothing else. It's not a chair that I don't like or a paint. It's a decision I made. I'm not happy with it. They could be 30 years ago. Every decision I've ever made is wrong. And that's going to happen. I know if it's happened all these times, I'm going to have a problem coming up. Doesn't take a rocket scientist with the decision I made. How do I deal with that? Bad decisions I've made.
Well, if you've been living in a world where you thought who you were was what you thought, you've been living as a bad person that's been made up and thought it was real the whole time. Why would you immediately imagine that all the decisions you made being that person, thinking you were that person,
That's where I'm at. And that's a
it.
terrible feeling. That's the feeling.
Yeah, it is. You know why? Because it's terrible to do that, to utilize everything you've been given.
You haven't told me that for a while. Yeah. You're right. And that's the part, that's the struggle.
Capacity.
That's where you start throwing up. That's where the throw up begins.
I agree, my friend. I had a gob of mucus. I got sick once and I had nausea in my stomach. My sense is, isn't it funny that we're on land and we get seasick?
Well, is that true?
Think of the nausea, the nervousness in our stomach.
Well, I didn't have seasickness though.
Well, I think nausea is very similar to seasickness.
Okay, I'll go with similar
And
symptoms.
my sense is, Anthony, it's those moods, it's the mood swings that we're being rocked by all the time. Trying to get better, okay, I feel better. Oh, no, I lost it.
And a weird thing is, I'm a little depressed right now talking about this honestly and what we've been fighting and lying about. And then my girlfriend texts me something that she liked, a video I sent her of a cat. So all of a sudden my brain shoots dopamine straight into my head. I feel good again, in live time. This is like live time.
But you're seeing how your experience is being created by the thinking you're doing about what's happening.
And that, yeah. But I think it's mostly just that I'm upset about all the, like, what if I would have? What if at that crossroad I would have said yes?
Do you know what you're upset about, Anthony?
Not having the money from it. The money and fame.
That having used that line of thinking that was insane for decades, and now beginning to see it, you're trying to still use it to justify and rationalize what you have no control over whatsoever, while you are missing the present state of your own potential to choose otherwise right now.
I see
that's what's terrible. And that's what's terrifying.
That's the good part.
Well, it's good to the degree that you start to see it, as you just said.
Yeah, but that's the best part.
But addiction is having us think it isn't happening, and we need to keep doing the same old thing over and over and over and over and over again.
And then thinking, hey, I should drive a car.
So here's my point. As I said to my friend the other day when she had that experience, we are quick to discount the value and the credit that we're starting to be due, right? If credit is due now for actual things happening.
What does that mean? Credit is due now? You mean take credit for? I'm not joking. I'm saying, what do you mean credit is due?
If you look at what you just did and how you just saw what you saw and started to see that it was terrible, if you actually look at that and say, well, that's actually an honest appraisal of what's happening.
And it feels great.
Okay. Credit due.
Yeah.
Right. Now,
telling the truth. You're saying when you're honest.
Think of all the credit you've been giving yourself for having achieved this goal and that goal and that thing and this thing. But all of those things you got, Anthony, soon ran out of the benefit. So you needed another thing to replace it, and another thing. You needed another dopamine hit.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've been using up your dopamine that is a natural well-being drug in your body, and wondering why you feel depleted when you stop doing all those tricky things you used to do and you thought you were you thought you were a magician.
Yeah, but what the thing that you didn't talk about, which I really like, is that you said, well, why is that? Because I'm always saying I made the wrong decision. I could have done, and then you said, well, why? Why is that? I'm like, because I would have had money and fame. It's not about the decision I'm mad about. It's about that I think I should have had more money and more fame. If I could have just done this, I would have been
think
more.
Think about it, Anthony. What you're saying is, if I can think more about this, I'll get the more I'm thinking about.
No, it's depressing. If I think more about it, it's so.
Exactly. You know what you're going to get more of? Suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
Compulsive actions, reactive behavior.
And it's good to talk about that rather than hiding it. You're only as sick as your secret, right?
Well, I'll tell you another secret. It's not a fucking secret. Nobody in your vicinity has been fooled. Nobody has been fooled.
The only buddy that's fooled is you, yourself.
Well, but Anthony, think of this now. While they may have a better sense of what's going on than you do because they have perspective, it's their own blindness and their own doing. See, we've been thinking, because we can't actually see our thoughts, that all the things we're manifesting around us are of no use and of no value.
Yeah.
We've been blaming other people for the things we're creating and the way that we're seeing them, rather than in the same way noticing the problem is a problem and saying, wow, that's a problem. That's actually good news that I even notice it. Now I can actually do something about it. But before I do anything about it, I better live with it, and rather than try to escape it and get over it and think about it in terms of feeling better than it and doing all those things that deny it. Start to say, wow, this problem is the curriculum of the day, of the moment.
Yeah,
It's
we
telling
talked
me,
about this a couple of days ago, that the accountability, when you say if we're even talking about it, it's a possibility, right? That's the accountability.
well, I would say the accountability is having it as it is, because accounting is all about balancing books, right? And
Wow, talk
if
about a
we're
great word.
imbalanced in our thinking,
Whoa,
we're not being accountable. And if
that's
we're
great.
imbalanced, we're unstable. It isn't because we're unstable, it's because we're thinking thoughts that have no stability, because they have no basis, literally no basis. There's no substance to them whatsoever.
What are we missing
Thoughtlessness.
here, Gabe?
That yeah, you don't like the self you think you are. Uh,
Yeah, that's what you were talking about last week.
But how can
I
you?
but Anthony, the thing about I make decisions too, and then I'm abhorred by them and scared by them and get seasick and nauseous and diarrhea.
Abhorred. I love that word. He's good at words, right? Abhorred. What does abhorred even mean?
Yeah,
It sounds bad. It sounds scary. Are you getting abhorred? They
yeah,
abhorred is Gabe, you
I
know?
hate I hate
They
myself.
abhorred us.
I hate myself that I think I am, and it becomes literally unbearable.
And you have to talk yourself out of it. You have to say, well, let's go eat or something
No,
else.
when I'm engaged in those thoughts, there is no out of it. They are my truth and reality, and there's no
No getting
dissipation.
around
There's
it.
no immediate ease.
Yeah.
But
Yes,
I
I
will tell you, Gabe, they're your experience. They're not your truth. They're your experience of delusional thoughts
yeah,
appearing to be real.
yeah.
Yeah.
That the whole mistaken identity is the idea that they are reality and truth. We think simply being able to create an experience, it's like if you're lit on fire, you're going to pretty much feel everything going on in the world is burning.
If somebody said to me on that point, Gabe, thanks for saying that. But on that point, if somebody said to me, Anthony, what's the worst part of your life? I would say the thoughts I think in my head, right? Because everything else is fucking great. I'm eating great. I got everything I could ever want. But there is one terrible thing in my life. It's I keep telling myself these terrible things.
Well, you keep thinking there's a self to tell.
I needed to hear that. Like that's where I'm at. I need to get to that point. Without you, I could never get to that next level.
No, 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 Anthony, you've always been there. You just haven't thought you were. And it's inevitable in human history. If there's a process going on in terms of our relative experience. It's always changing. It's always
And you
new. It's
haven't met
always
my
new.
relatives. I'm you just you.
Actually, I did meet your dad and your mom.
Relativity. I just
But
realized it. Whatever time it is, that it's really the worst thing. I'm like, what is it that I hate in my life so much? And it's me. It's my thoughts. That's the
no,
reason
no,
I'm here.
no.
Right on.
It's the thoughts you have that you think are reality, and the you have that you think are reality. That hate, by the way, abhorrent. Think of this: to regard with extreme repugnance or aversion, detest utterly, loathe, abominate. Think of
Good
that.
word.
Now, think of what people say: self-loathing, self-hate.
Yeah,
Why? Why would they love that self based in fear, based in an idea that isn't true, being acted on as though it is true, which means my life is a lie? What do people hate being called but a liar? People
yeah,
always argue that they're not liars. Every one of us is lying to the degree that we maintain any thought as true that isn't true. Any thought. That means culturally, that means biologically, that means physically,
I'm still
all of it.
skinny. I'm not that
I'm
overweight.
talking even more fundamental than that.
Not that
Even
overweight.
about life ending. Life probably doesn't end if it's infinite, but life forms seem to come and go. They seem to be born, and anything born seems to come to a point where it disintegrates, no longer is integrated within the whole. And yet, the disintegration only transforms that steaming body that was a life form taking a shape into the same exact elements that it was always made of.
Yeah,
They just go their own way into that invisibility that we think because it's invisible isn't. We can think because it's invisible it isn't there, but it's exactly the same thing we think about our thinking, that we can dismiss it and pretend isn't there because we
yeah,
really don't see it, while we're manifesting all these effects around us
yeah.
and claiming they're happening to us, to once again pretend we're blind to what's actually happening. We're
I
not. We
feel like
know.
I feel like in that movie Scream, that scene where she calls the police department and they go, "We traced the call," And he goes, it's coming from in the house.
So seeing this, a couple of things, and Gabe, I think you made a couple of points I might have jumped over, but I
Yeah, thanks,
don't
Gabe.
hesitate to.
It's just it's the same thing, Anthony, that I'm dealing with, that Jack deals with. It's that
It's the only thing I'm realizing. I thought it was this and other things. It's not this problem. This is the only problem.
yeah.
So
it's
as
you.
Gabe was saying,
The only problem is you, Anthony.
well, it isn't you. It's your ideas about
It's your
you.
idea.
That's all.
That's why we
It's
need
like-
Jack. We keep forgetting.
it's
We want to
like-
blame somebody.
You're not struggling with reality. You're struggling with what you think of reality. You're not
Yeah.
struggling with life. You're struggling
God,
with
that's
what
so
you think of
freeing to
life.
know that. That's
All right,
the
well,
problem. You don't realize
here's the part that isn't freeing, Anthony. Is when you start actually living like that, you're going to start to see how sick you are and have been in terms of your thinking.
Yeah, right.
And it can seem overwhelming.
Because when you don't fix it, it's fine. There's no problem. The only time you realize there's a problem is once you fix it and go, holy shit, that was the problem. What I thought was not the problem was the problem.
But the problem's always been lurking as though it wasn't there. That's why we have that sense of dread, that sense of fear, that sense of doubt, that sense of there's that anticipation that something's about to go wrong. It isn't about to go wrong, it's happening now. We want to postpone it. We want to put it off into some other time, some other place, some other thing.
That's
It's
funny.
the immediacy of our own doing. But to start seeing that is literally to witness the entirety. This has been talked about in mythology, fairy tales, superstition, literature. The facing of this is the greatest fear, because the ultimate fear that's built up in our bodies and our systems that we've been trying to manage and feel better than, the only way to dissipate it is to experience it and allow it to go. And you allow it to go by breathing. When this is happening, rather than be impulsive and trying to get away from it, just take some deep breaths and notice it starts to dissipate. Starts to dissipate immediately. You know what breath is? Spirit, by definition, and it's in its etymological root. It's about spirit. The breath we take, we're always breathing in and out, in and out, in and out. What are we trying to do? Fix things. Fix seems like something's broken, but fixation and fix is trying to keep things still. If we kept our breath still, we wouldn't last very long. But here's nature. If I hold my breath too long, I pass out and start breathing. I'm still unconscious and my body's breathing. Why? Because it does for me what I don't even have to think about, for the most part. So where I have thinking and choice, if I'm using that choice and that freedom not to excel in my ability to express the fullness that we all share, as Gabe was saying, if we share it together and we're looking at basic mechanics of life that are similar, if not the identical basis, which I would suggest is in fact the case, if we're thinking of it that way, then we have an enormous amount to give each other by simply functioning as though we're literate. Functional literacy is actually reading the body language correctly rather than running from it and thinking it's something to escape, when the irony of that is the further we run, the faster it comes with us. It goes with us because it's in our head. It's all what we're doing with our brain. If we start doing that, we start being examples and exemplary in that example, and start to create an environment that isn't highly charged with tension and reactivity, but actually space and freedom. That same quietness that you talked about, where you feel there's nothing going on, that's actually the wisdom of intuition, knowing there's nothing you need to do, absolutely nothing you ever need to do. And yet when you start choosing from that piece, you'll be choosing from inspiration rather than the desperation of this constant conflicted emotional state and mental state.
Okay, so I make another bad decision in the future. Go figure out that, right? Whether it's a bag of chips or
Look forward to it.
Look forward to it. So it happens. Hey, you ate another bag of chips. I'm really upset at you, Anthony. What is you have no willpower? You got a
Isn't it, Anthony? Isn't it interesting that we could be so upset about something that isn't happening that we can have absolutely nothing to do with whatsoever? There's no correction in that whatsoever.
What, eating the chips?
Whatever it was, whatever that decision was that isn't
when you shouldn't eat
happening.
chips.
So
The,
any
the exact
decision we
example of
make, any
chips.
decision we make that isn't right, that we think we can focus on in the
Yeah.
present, where we
Yeah.
always are,
Yeah.
and we're going to focus on it as though it's the only thing present. It isn't the thing we did, but the thing we're doing that's bothering us.
Hmm.
The
I
healing
like
and the disease happen simultaneously in the only place anything ever happens, which is the present, now. So if there's any growth in the learning from that, is the question of how many things am I thinking that I don't even think I'm thinking? And in
Whoa.
my experience, when I started considering that, I blew the lid off of what I had previously thought to be my subconscious, where all this stuff lurked and I couldn't get to, and it was inaccessible. And then I realized how stupid is it, how silly is it for us to talk about a subconscious as though it's sub and yet still conscious,
Whoa.
openly, consciously talk about it as though we have no idea what's in there. How clever that we constructed. Here's another narrative,
Yeah.
Anthony. We constructed this subconscious. Now, listen, there are all kinds of things in our body and brain that are going on that we don't need to think about at all. But if we think of that metaphor, that's a knowingness that I don't need to think about at all for it to be going on. But here's the other part. The thinking I do either helps that knowingness develop in a productive, instinctually survival-oriented direction, or it begins to kill that organism that I've been put in charge of, because I begin to undermine every one of those bodily systems and their capacity to fight off diseases as they come. Bacteria deal with germs. There's germs and bacteria all over the place. Our bodies are designed to manage that stuff, not because I think about it, but if the thinking I do depresses my bodily systems and functions, I am going to be prone to disease, and any disease I have is going to be exaggerated as a result of the weakness I've created. So while I don't have to think about any of that stuff, the thinking I do affects all of that stuff. Once again, showing that it's infinite, connected, interactive, connected. We're always connected to everything that's happening. We're always impacting everything that's happening. We are always responsible for everything that is happening. And it's not because I am and you're not, but to start seeing that if we all are and we're not acting like that, no wonder we have so many problems we keep thinking are impossible to resolve, and things that we have nothing to do with at the same time, globally.
Yeah.
Of course we'd be doing it.
Does this work on pets?
Well, Gabe was talking earlier about the difference between cats and dogs.
What is the difference?
When you want the cat to come, it doesn't. When you want the dog to come, it's always, when you want the dog to go, it doesn't want to.
Yeah. Now, this isn't bringing up animals. I was at a friend's house, and there was this cat, and it was so cute. It just wanted to attack something. It was so cat-like, and then they had a little laser for it to chase, because they didn't want to have to play with it. So the laser would go around the room by itself, and the cat would chase it. Why is a cat's brain set up so, like, you could take a dog and do a laser, it's not going to do the same thing, or another animal? Why is the cat programmed, and what is that? Where is that part in the brain? Why does that, every cat, nobody says, okay, you're a cat.
Anthony, can you imagine that you have so little to think about that has to do with what you're doing, that you need to figure out what cats are doing?
Well, because I'm always designing things. I have patents on that kind of stuff. And I want to
Anthony, if you start from the wisdom of knowing that knows the answer to that question, you wouldn't be asking the question. You would be developing your own ability to begin to express that knowingness, so you'd have a better chance of understanding it without even thinking about it. Because it's part of the exact same nature.
What would Google?
What? You there? We lose you?
I went on mute for a second. What would Google say? I'm going to Google it right now.
Well, it's somewhat irrelevant to the point we're making. If you have an absolute knowing nature and you begin to actually act like you have an absolute knowing nature, the chances are you're going to have answers to things that you would think are completely complex and impossible to deal with. Historically, we've thought that nature was mysterious. To think nature is mysterious is to think we have nothing to do with nature, that there is no greater knowingness and awareness of nature. So we're always trying to uncover and discover nature. Well, nature's always been discovered because it's been doing what nature's been doing as long as nature's been nature. If we're thinking about it incorrectly, we're going to create hurdles to that understanding to justify the poor thinking we're doing rather than the actual potential we have to understand it quickly and easily and have resolutions occur and solutions occur that aren't created by us, but simply discovered in the sense of my own thinking rather than the denial I use to pretend I have no better idea about things.
And I'll argue the relevance here is that we're talking about the human brain. All this is about thoughts and human nature and why we do things. I want to know why it's not some far off stretch, but I want to know why cats act that way. What is
Well,
it? Why are
good.
they?
Good. You got something to do this week.
Yeah.
Yeah, figure that out.
I mean, it's strange that you have to worry about it jumping on you. What other animal you have to worry about it attacking you like that? But that's just the way cats are when they're young. They have to chase a string.
Anthony, don't underestimate your ability to distract yourself from actually dealing with the issues that you're capable of dealing with in the most productive manner. And given that this experience you're having, you actually have a human body. If you had a cat's body, I think you'd have a better chance of
Well,
figuring the cat
I
out.
have
But
cat-like reflexes. That's
verbally, especially. So the point is here, we can
and
launch into
I
a
want a cat
thousand.
too. Let our listeners know I'm thinking about getting a cat.
Well, that's a commitment not to get married.
Right.
You're trying to have a relationship with the cat. I know a lot of people that don't think they're going to get married. They seem to end up with a lot of cats. But the point is, Anthony, we can distract ourselves in many different ways from this conversation, and you're welcome to do that. That's your choice, your prerogative. And
Well, I got to stop you right there. It's that I'm saying that's what this whole group to me is about. It's the part of distracting yourself. I don't care what it is. You're just doing something to distract yourself. It is the discussion.
not if you're using what you're doing as a lesson in your ability to begin to express reality in its essence rather than
I
the
like that.
reality you think is yours.
Yes.
That's the difference. So
I
one
like
is a
that.
distraction to pretend that what's happening isn't happening. That's addiction. That's how addiction works. It's a denial, a resistance to what's happening, thinking that somehow, and wondering why the struggle persists. We resist it, create pressure, and wondering why we get built up and we get this sort of headaches and
Yeah.
tension and all that kind of stuff, that explosive nature. We know it. We're speaking to it. You listen to the terms like I used to say, probably haven't said this for a while, but listen for our listeners. Listen to the words you're
Yeah.
using. Listen to the commentary you make, and you'll see the words you're using are speaking to the thinking you're doing. And it's another avenue that we have to begin to have perspective where we don't think we can see our thoughts, we actually can. Seeing for humans, given that we're rational by nature, doesn't mean that we're rational in the thinking we do or reasonable, but we have that capacity to be reasonable and rational. If we're doing that accurately, we're starting to use understanding to see things that are otherwise invisible. So understanding is the seeing of the invisibility of life. This thing that we can't see with our eyes, we can understand in understanding. And if you're using it and utilizing it in that way and starting to see the absolute perfection in the design, the growth is not, it can't even be gauged in terms of exponential and numbers because it's an infinite sense of awareness that is absolutely connected to everything going on simultaneously right now. It's what enlightenment is. They talk about enlightenment. Why? Because it's light. It's light both in weight and it's light both in brightness. Brilliance is talked about that way. What is brilliance? It's light shining through us. It's the ability to actually utilize the knowledge we have, not because we've done it academically or because we've read a lot of books or because we've come to a lot of conclusions, but simply because we're willing to be aware that we have that awareness, allows the expression of that awareness to happen. And what I've learned is I say things sometimes before I even think of them and then think, wow, did I just say that? Because that process seems so alarming to me, given that I haven't always, but I've largely been thinking about my thinking. So what I say seems to make sense before I say it so that I don't look like an idiot, right? So that appearance has been important to me because that's all that ego is. That's all that those ideas about thinking are is just appearance. It's how things seem. It's not how things are. How things actually are is how they are. How things seem is not how they are. How they seem to thinking. How they appear to be. If we're only looking at appearance, we're not thinking of substance. And to start realizing everything has an invisible substance, everything, is to start to realize so do we. And now I am in concert with everything, all things, all that are and all that is, simultaneously, right now, all of us. And that's a windfall, literally, of benefit and wealth and worthiness and value and virtue and ethics and morals. Literally. And think of the word substance and understanding. They're both the same thing. Substance, beneath our feet. Understanding, beneath our feet. Foundation, fundamental. Think of that. Funding mental capacity. Fundamental. I always thought that would be a good name for a mortgage company. But food for thought that's valuable, like food for digestion that's valuable, that's nutritive, that's healthy, that's natural. Food for thought that's natural is funding mental health because it's healthy the same way good food funds health. And bad food funds all kinds of other problems, physical problems. So we seem to be mysteriously unaware how they happen while we're eating food that's largely, I think 60 or 70% of the food in the grocery store really doesn't qualify into the word food because it's highly processed.
I saw a funny Instagram meme that said that she gets mad that all they do in the grocery store is sell you this cancer-causing food, and at the end, when you're paying for it, they ask if you want to donate to cancer.
Right. And you think that's ironic. Think of the reflection of accurately. Think of how clear that is if you look at it accurately and say, look, it's like watching our words. That thing I used to say, and everybody thought that I was saying to them, don't say what you want to say. Like I was telling them to censor. Because watch your words has been taken as don't say that. But in fact, if you watch your words, you start actually getting perspective on what you're thinking. And sometimes if you listen to those words accurately and just write them down and say, you say, wow, I must be thinking that to be saying that. And then realize that, I was full of all kinds of connotations of what I meant when I was saying what I was saying, which was just another form of delusion and trying to manipulate this fantasy that I had going on, so that when I actually looked at the words, I thought, man, I'm not saying that at all.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that at all. So, Gabe, what's left?
I guess I'd like to just, for those listening, is that Anthony's version of himself is the same as my version of myself when I think my thoughts are real and things are going to happen. Decisions made in the past are going to affect my current future. That these are all made up fairy tales in my head. They're the same condition.
Yeah.
And and Anthony's right, when you're feeling better and everything's okay, you don't think you're insane and everything's right and that decision wasn't that bad. But like you said, Jack, when the feelings and the nauseousness are actually indicators of something wrong, they're not indicators of something's wrong with that decision you made or that thought you have. It's that something is wrong and that you are thinking false things to be true.
Right now. We feel immediately
those are the
what
symptoms you need to be aware of, not the ones where you think you're going to lose something or not get something or have something bad.
Let's close on that, Gabe, because I was going to bring this up the other day and I didn't get to it. And think of what it says in sobriety, that the primary fears are losing what we have and not getting what we want. Okay. We talked about that. And Anthony, I think I clarified not getting what we demand. Right.
Yeah.
That was the actual
I was going to say that. Yeah.
But
I don't think it says that.
Think about this. If I think who I am is not who I am, I have now traded in having everything for having absolutely nothing but an opinion.
Dude, I feel like I'm watching Shakespeare, the way you said, having traded everything for having nothing. I'm going to write that down, the way you delivered it, too. Having traded everything and having nothing.
Re-listen to this, Anthony, which is why we record it, so that you can listen to your voice all day long.
I like the way you're saying having traded everything in.
For nothing.
For
Okay, so
nothing.
think about this. Think about this. I'm afraid of losing what I have. Think about
I'm going to
that.
write that down. I'm
I'm
afraid of losing what I
living,
have.
I'm living in fear because I have made believe that who I am is not who I am, and as a result, reality is no longer reality. So here
Whoa.
I've given up reality. I'm living in it. It's not something I'm afraid of in the future. It's something I'm witnessing in the present. Second half of this, I'm not going to get what I want. What do I want? I want reality. I want to have
Yeah.
things right. I'm striving for the thing I just gave up in the imagination that who I am is what I think.
Who I am is what I think.
So now I'm claiming that my job in life, given that I'm unwilling to admit that this first thought I had about who I am is wrong, I'm maintaining the thought that it's right. And I think my job in life is to seek and source unlimited riches to finally give myself the satisfaction that I have received all that I possibly can have, when in fact, I can never get enough to replace everything. It's impossible. It's impossible. That's addiction in a nutshell.
I love it, buddy. I feel like I just watched Shakespeare. Great delivery. I'm going to write it down and have Katie deliver it. You did it. It was really beautiful, right, Gabe? Wasn't that great?
Yeah.
I feel like I'm listening to Jack Kerouac like 50 years. Like people are going to be, there's no way you heard him saying that. I'm like, yeah.
Anthony, today you spoke in poetic terms in the sense that you were saying things that were very light and very ethereal and very clear, and yet starting to notice the struggle. And that struggle, as I said earlier, in my experience, when I started realizing that I was thinking things I didn't even think I was thinking,
Yeah.
I began to see the moment as something different than simply trying to say, I feel great now, and now I'm going to try to preserve it forever. But
Yeah.
saying this clarity I have right now is giving me the chance to be clear and honest about those other things I may not even think I'm doing. Now
So
I
that's
start
where the
to
Shakespeare
actually,
comes from. It's thinking things I am not thinking. How many things am I not thinking? Right. That's
no,
really
I
what
don't
you're
ask that
instructing.
question, Anthony. I don't ask the question of how many. I look more at that I'm doing it
I
rather
always
than
want
what
to
am I
count
doing.
everything. How many is it? I want to count. I'm an accountant.
Just get this.
7.
Focus more. If you can focus more on that, you're doing it, not
Yes.
what are you doing is a question. How are you doing it is a question. How many is a question. If you're
Right.
constantly in that thread, you're still trying to figure out why the shortness
Right.
of your own seeming self can't add up. You're
Right.
still trying to figure it out. That you're doing it is a fact.
Yes. Okay.
And if you can admit the fact, the information of the present, you'll be in a
Doesn't matter.
relationship, you'll be in a relationship with it that isn't in doubt. You'll be in a relation of certainty and assurance with it. You will start hearing what it's saying because it won't be coming to you in the words you use that can be confused. It'll come to you in a sensation of awareness that will be profoundly certain
Yeah. When
and welcoming.
this girl that I was gonna say I liked in AA, but then I realized that's not true. So I got to say this girl that I knew in AA, she would say, if the house is on fire, you don't sit there and try to figure out why it's on fire, like what caused it.
Good. Yeah. But listen, when you're thinking in terms of intuition, the knowingness is pervasive. It isn't just about little things and bits and pieces. It's about the awareness of it all. And the bits and pieces all of a sudden start to make perfect sense because they've never not made sense. We've been making nonsense out of them by thinking of them as reality and thinking that lack of substance, the real substance abuse in the mental illness of addiction is thinking that a lie has substance. What's the first step? I thought I had power over alcohol. I thought I had power over drugs. I thought I had power over sex. I thought I had power over gambling. I thought I had power over food. What was the problem? I was lying about it. It wasn't the food. It wasn't the gambling. It wasn't the drugs. It wasn't the sex. It wasn't the alcohol. They're all symptoms, symbols, as the book says. The problem was I was lying and thought the lie had power because I kept focusing on it. I kept paying attention to it. I kept obsessively thinking about it and thinking that obsession would eventually turn it into truth and reality, which is the one thing it absolutely can never be. Why?
Wow.
Truth and reality isn't missing anything. It isn't waiting
Sure.
for us to finally conclude it. It's saying, you know what, we got 99% here. We need humanity to come to the rescue of the final percent.
If that one Anthony guy right here, this guy here, if he would just You just need
Think
one
of
more.
the God complex we have to make believe that we've created reality out of a self simply by thinking about our thinking itself and concluding that's who we are and what reality is. Think of the
That was a
God
mouthful.
complex in that. And
Is
think
that
of
like, how does the God complex differ from the imposter syndrome?
doesn't. It's the exact same thing. I'm imposing on my experience that I am the creator of reality. And as a result, there is no other reality. Why
This
wouldn't
is the
I
best
feel
show.
self-loathing, self-hatred,
Why?
be consumed with fear? Because the self I'm thinking of is absolutely banished from any reality. It's isolated, alienated, not even,
Oh,
it can't
now
even
I
be
get what
alone
you're
because it doesn't
saying.
even exist. It's insanity.
And yet I'm keeping it alive and well. I'm like, well, fuck, don't talk to my buddy that way.
You think you are. All right,
Ooh.
so I have a breakfast appointment with somebody, and we're
Hey,
gonna
will you
go.
send me this link? This is the best. It's like that other old story where the kid leaves his house from his parents at like 18 and can't wait to get out of there. And he comes back like 10 years later or 5 years later. And he's like, I can't believe how much my parents have really matured. They're just 5 years.
You know where the podcast is, just mental obsession discussion. You can find it on any of the links, and it'll be up in a little bit. I'm gonna try to get it up before I walk out of the building.
That was like Shakespeare.
Love you guys. Thank you.
Thanks.
You too.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Gabe.
Gabe.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank
Talk
you
to you
very much.
soon.
Appreciate
Bye.
it. Bye.
Bye, Jack. That was good. Hey, Jack, good job.
Thank you, sir.
Can you turn off the recording? You don't have to see. Are you? I feel like I'm in that show. She's like, I see Anthony out there. I see. Remember that show where she Romper Room or something where she'd